Hi and welcome to another QwikTouchPro video. This is going to be our fourth video now in our series on using QwikTouchPro and Keystroke to build a kiosk. And in the previous video we created this review order template where the customer could review and edit their items or review their shopping cart or their transaction before proceeding on to the enter payment screen. And then that's what we're going to create in this video, is that enter payment screen. So the customer is going to hit the checkout button and go on to our new template, which will be, let's create this just like we did the previous templates in this series. We'll go 10.8 by 19.2, whoops, 19.2 for 1080 by 1920. We're going to display it in window mode. We're going to lock the width, 100% height, right justify, say OK. And let's save this as kiosk underscore enter payment screen. And this template's really not going to do much. We're going to put a message on here that says use pin pad to complete sale, and then we're just going to sit on this template until we detect from keystroke that the sale has been completed through the pin pad. So let's start off. I'm going to drag our little color palette custom control that I built in a previous video, and I'm going to go ahead and set the template background color on this to green. And I think, instead of green, let's make this a gradient. So I'm going to copy that green stop and change it to yellow. A good combination. And then we'll just increase this little gradient slider. And this is just to mix it up a little bit. This is obviously optional, or design your templates however you'd like. And we'll just rotate a couple of these so it's not quite such a flat line moving up and down. Anyway, let's say OK. So we go from just a little transitional gradient there. And next we want is just some text on here. And this is going to say something like use pin pad to complete sale. Let's word wrap that, or text wrap that, and zoom in. And I'm going to use the nudge and the tweak keys again to zoom this out. Just holding down shift and the right arrow key to get it full screen, or full width. And then I'm going to do the same thing, shift into the down arrow key to resize it and get it to a size that I like. And that's probably as good as any. Maybe we'll make that bold, make the font a little smaller so it fits. Use pin pad to complete sale. There we go. And let's move that up to the top a little bit. Nudge that back in. Maybe we make the font white for this guy. All right, save that. We're probably done with our color swatch. I'm going to delete that. So now to figure out what we want our use pin pad to complete sale template to do, let's go ahead and well, we don't need to preview this. Let's just go into keystroke and take a look at what's going to happen here. Oops, password 1. So first thing here is I don't have a way to run credit card transactions on the machine I'm building on right now. So we're going to simulate all of this with cash transaction instead of a credit card transaction. But the process is essentially the same, so you can customize it to your credit card sale. But again, we'll use cash. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to initiate a cash transaction. I'm going to do that with control 1. And I'm in the tutor data, and the sales payment buttons, I think it's sales payment types, are set up with these keyboard shortcuts. So control 1 gets us to a cash sale. I think control 3 maybe gets you to a credit card sale, however you have your data set up. Let's back out of this. Let's get a fresh transaction here. Sorry about all that. Let's add a couple items to this. All right, so let's hit control 1, which gets us to a cash payment. And this is where we're going to simulate the credit card sale. So we're just going to, when we get to the screen, we'll just hit OK to pay exact change, which gets us onto the next screen where we're now at the sales payment screen, or print buttons, or whatever we call this one, I think print buttons. And your keystroke configuration may be different than this. When you receive the pin pad confirmation, you may automatically print a receipt and save the transaction and go to a new transaction to start the whole process over. But for our purpose here, we're just going to leave tutor how it's set up. And we'll say after we get our payment confirmation, we come to this print invoice screen where we can choose to save, print, email, whatever. And in our case, then we're just going to hit save, or let's just do F10 for whatever the default is. And we'll end up starting a new transaction. So that's kind of the process we're going to walk through. We're going to do that control 1, simulate a cash payment, and then once we verify the payment, we'll hit F10 to save the transaction. So let's go back into keystroke. And the way we're going to do all that is through the data port, or the way we're going to monitor that is through the keystroke data port. And let's go back to keystroke for just a second. If we go back to how we set our data port up, parameters, data port. We have all these checkpoints in here when the customer's selected, when the transaction's saved, cleared. And we're going to use these checkpoints to kind of monitor where we're at in keystroke, so we know what keys we need to send or what templates we need to show. So let's close that, go back into QwikTouchPro. And to know a little trick here to kind of help us figure out which of those checkpoints are firing when, so we know which ones to respond to. I'm going to put a little label up at the top. Let's make the font color white. And we're going to bind this to our current checkpoint, and then as the checkpoint's changing, we'll be able to just kind of monitor what's happening and know what we need to respond to. And let's just wire that up so you can see what that looks like. We'll go to our data. We're going to browse out to our keystroke data port that we set up in a previous video. And one of these should be checkpoint. There we go, checkpoint, hit apply. Make the text a little bigger on that so we can see it. Save that and run that. All right, so the last thing that happened in the data port was the transaction was saved, and that's because our previous transaction was saved. If we hit F8 and escape, the last thing is going to be left customer entry box. If we add a couple of inventory items to this, you'll see that we change over here to line item. And now we want to see what happens when we hit Control 1. Hit 1, we go into the enter payment box. And now in our case, again, we don't care much about this one because this is telling the customer to go over to use the PIN pad to complete the transaction. But the next screen, when we hit OK and pay our exact change, this is the next screen we're going to see after they've completed their credit card transaction as well. So you can see that we've entered the print box. So we know that when we come to this template, we're going to hit Control 1 to open the payment box. We're going to somehow simulate our cash payment, which we're just doing because we can't do credit card payments here. And then we're going to listen for this enter print box event. And as soon as we identify or hear that we've entered the print box, we're going to, probably just hit F10 here to save and complete this transaction. And we could get fancy with this. If you are going to show this screen, we could have, when we enter the print box, we could show our next template which says, do you want an email receipt or a print receipt, or do you just want to save and skip the receipt? But in our case, again, we'll just choose for them and hit F10 to go to the next transaction. And when we do that, our checkpoint up here changes to transaction saved. So let's go back into QwikTouchPro and see how we set all that up. Let's back out. So first thing when this template loads, we want to send Control 1 to initiate that cash payment screen. And again, you would initiate whatever your sales payment type keyboard shortcut is for a credit card. We're going to go under Template, Macros, Load, and on Load we want to go to Active Program, Send Code, Control, and we need the number 1, which when you send it as a code is VK or Virtual Key 1. So we'll hit Add, so we're going to send Control 1, save that, close that. And the next thing we need to next thing we need to do is just want to sit here until we hear from the data port that we're at the, what I think it was the enter payment box probably. So let's go under Data Sources, Manage, and we have our data port on this template, and we didn't add it to this template, but it's on here because this data port or this label is bound to it. So if anything on this template uses this data source at all, it's going to show up on this list. We're just going to select data port, go under Edit Macros, and here we'll see under our events we have all those checkpoints that we saw earlier. And we are, I think it was enter print box is what we're looking for. And that's what we saw after we simulated the payment. So again, we're going to sit on this template until we enter the print box. And then we're going to go to Active Program, Send Code. And we're just going to send F10 to complete the transaction. It's add code and add. And we can save that and close that. And let's just see how that's working. I'm going to save this template. We need to come into this template from our review order to get that Control 1 to work. So let's just, you can go back and add a couple of items here. Go to checkout, and I'm going to go to checkout again. Oh, we haven't wired up our checkout button yet. We've got to go do that. Sorry about that. So let's go back into a review order. We're just going to double click button checkout. When we click this button, we want to go to QwikTouchPro, Show Template, and we're going to browse out to Enter Payment Screen. And this button's already, no, we don't want to customize that. And we already set this checkout button up so it's only enabled under our correct conditions. But now if we hit checkout, we're going to go to our PIN pad or use PIN pad to complete sales screen, and we hit Control 1. So now we're sitting here waiting for the customer. And then at this point, I'm going to hit F10 to simulate completing the sale. And then we've gone into the print box. And as soon as we detected that we went into the print box, we hit F10 again, which saved the transaction and moved us off to a new sale. And that all happened pretty quickly. Let's just walk through that again. Well, I guess we need to finish setting this up first. We'll walk through that again in a minute. Let's go back into here. And we want to say, where were we? Manage, data port. We want to say after we enter the print box and hit F10, we want to go back to the main transaction, or go back to the main touch here to begin screen. And we could do this. We could just say, enter the print box, we hit F10, and we know that that worked. We're going to move on to the next template. But let's instead do, let's say when we detect that the transaction is actually saved, let's go to QwikTouchPro, Show Templates. And we will show we're going back to touch here to begin, I think. Touch here to begin. And again, we're just, this is a little bit of bulletproofing here. For some reason, when we hit F10, if the receipt paper's out of printer or receipt printer's out of paper, I don't know what would cause this. But if we hit F10 and it doesn't end up saving the transaction, we won't leave this template. So hit save, and you would need to handle that some other way, right? If you think there's a chance that when we hit F10, this transaction is not going to save properly, you need to have some macros in here that say, well, if we don't get the transaction saved event that we were expecting, we need to maybe show another template that says, see clerk for help or payment failed or something like that. Again, we're just kind of happy path through this. So we're going to say when the transaction saved, we just want to go back to that main template. And let's close that, save that, and review order again. Let's go back into keystroke. How are we doing here? So we'll go to checkout. We go in and hit Control-1 to start our cash payment. I'm going to hit F10 to simulate the cash payment. We're going to enter the print box. It's going to save the transaction. Once we detect the transaction saved, we automatically go back to touch here to begin. So we should be able to ring up a complete sale here now. Update that. Go to checkout. We're going to hit F10 to simulate them using the pin pad to complete their transaction. We're going to take the payment. Sits here for a little bit while keystroke kind of goes through and finalizes the transaction. But you notice we wait until the transaction is actually saved to go back to touch here to begin. So the next thing we're going to do, let's go back into QwikTouchPro Editor and our enter payment screen. I'm just going to add a little demo button on here to simulate that cash payment instead of having to go to QwikTouchPro and hit F10. And again, you wouldn't have this button on your real kiosk because you're going to use the pin pad to finish the sale. This will just give us a button to click on, save that, and we'll call this simulate, what do we call this? Simulate cash payment, maybe. Word wrap that, make the text smaller, make it all fit. And I'm not going to do much with this button because this is just really for this video is an easy way for us to simulate a cash payment without having to go into QwikTouchPro or go into keystroke and hit F10. So all we're doing on this, we'll go to active programs, send code, we're going to send F10. F10's on here somewhere. F10, add code, add, close that. Let's center that button, layout, center. All right, so I don't know. Let's put some color on that, I guess. Let's make the button green, maybe. Should probably show up down here with some white text on it. All right, so we're done with this checkpoint label up here. We're going to delete that and save the template again. So the next thing we want to do on this template is we're telling the customer to use the pin pad to complete the sale. If they walk off right now without actually completing the sale, or if their credit card times out or something like that, we don't want to stay on the screen forever. We want to, after some certain amount of idle time, we want to redirect back to the touch here to begin screen and clear this transaction. And the way we're going to do that is through a template idle macro. So if we go under template macros, edit, under our source of template, we have events for load, close, and idle. And we're going to choose idle. And what idle means is if there's no activity on this kiosk for a predetermined amount of time, we're going to fire this event, and then we'll be able to respond and go back to our main template screen. Or go back to our touch here to begin screen. And that idle time is configured in QwikTouchPro. We'll take a look at it later. Defaults to 60 seconds. So if nobody touches this kiosk for 60 seconds, we're going to fire this idle macro. And in our case, if we do that, we want to clear the current transaction and go back to the main screen. And I think, let's close that. I think we've already set that up under one of our templates here. If we go into, I think it's our sales screen, and look at the macros on this, we are actually already calling this. We're clearing the transaction with Control-End, F10, and then redirecting to the touch here to begin. So instead of redoing this macro, I'm going to double click on this, come up and export this like we've done but in the past. And let's call this clear transaction and return to start. It's a little wordy, but it tells us what we need to know. Save, and then if we delete these macros off of this button, and I'm just doing this for consistency now, it doesn't really matter, but we're going to say QwikTouchPro, run macro export, and we're going to browse out and do that clear transaction, return to start, hit add. So the cancel button does just exactly what it did before, but now we've moved that macro, that set of macros off into this reusable file. So we'll close that, save that. Let's go back into our payment screen and now say template macros back under idle. So when this template becomes idle, we want to do the same thing. QwikTouchPro, run macro export, and we are going to clear transaction and return to start. Say add and close, and let's take a look at that macro back under data, macros, edit. Let's look at this clear transaction and return to start. And again, what we're doing here, we're sending Control and F10 and then returning back to the main template. So let's see how that's, oops. I type it wrong again. There we go. So if we put an item on here, so if we simulate that, if we hit Control-End, F10, we clear the transaction. But we, on our payment screen, we are actually hitting Control 1 first. And when we're on our payment screen, if we clear a transaction, our screen's going to look like this. We're going to be on this payment box. So we actually need to hit Escape a few times before we can clear the transaction. So if we hit Escape, Escape, Escape. So we have to hit Escape 3 times, and then Control End, and then F10 to clear the transaction. But before we move on, notice if we're not on the payment screen, if we're just here, we can hit Escape 3 times here as well. 1, 2, 3, Control End, F10 to save the transaction. So we can hit Escape even if we don't need to. So instead of making one macro that hits Escape 3 times and one that doesn't, we're just going to come in and edit this guy. And we're in the macro editor editing it now. So before we hit Send Code, we're going to just hit Escape 3 times. So we're going to say Active Program, Send Code. We're going to hit Escape. Oh, there it was. Escape, Add, Add. And we want to do that first. So we're going to move up and hit Escape. And then to get it to 3 times, we could do that 3 times, enter the code 3 times, or we can come down to QwikTouchPro, repeat next action, and say we want to repeat the next action 3 times. And if we move that up at the top here now, so now when we call this clear transaction and return to begin macro, we're going to repeat next action 3 times. So we'll hit Escape 3 times, Control End 1 time, F10 1 time, and then return to the main template. So let's hit close and save. And let's preview that. And the way we're going to test this, we can come down here under QwikTouchPro and go to Properties. And this is where we set our idle time. And let's set it to something small like 4 seconds here. And add an item and hit Control F1 to get to our payment screen. And I think if we sit here for 4 seconds, we should see that we clear the transaction and go back to our main template. And there we go. So, like that. And while we're doing that, we need to set up idle timers like that for all of these templates. So let's go back into our sales screen. If this template sits here, if they get to this screen and they start to add a couple of items and they wander off, we want to reset clear the transaction and start the whole process over. So we're just going to go under Template, Macros, Edit, and we're going to add another idle just like we did. And we're just going to QwikTouchPro, run macro export, and we're going to clear the transaction and return to start. And we can hit add and close. Let's save that. And we have one more on here. Our review order screen is going to need to do the same thing. If they sit on this template, again, if they get partially through the kiosk process here and they don't complete the sale, we just want to wait a certain amount of time and then start over. So we'll go to Template, Macros, Edit, Idle, and we're going to say QwikTouchPro, run macro export, and we're going to run clear transaction, return to start. Hit add, close that, and let's preview our template again and see where we're at. We should be able to go back. Let's cancel this transaction and start over. We can now add items. We can browse to different departments. We can go to checkout. We can update our item. We can go to our checkout screen. And now if we simulate our cash payment, we should hit F10. If we sit here for 4 seconds, we'll clear the transaction, go back to the main screen. But let's simulate the cash payment. Transaction clears, goes back to the main screen. So I think the next thing we want to do on this template, and probably the last thing, if we go back into our payment screen, we want to wait for the customer to be able to cancel this transaction from the payment screen. So we're just going to put a cancel button on here. Let's go back to our review order, and we can just grab it from here. And we can do cancel and let's actually not do back. Once they've started the... we could do back as well, I think. So let's copy both those buttons. Copy them, go back to our enter payment screen, paste these in, and let's move them down here at the bottom. Zoom in a little bit. So the cancel button should already be wired up. Actually, it isn't. That's great. Let's go back into this. We're running the macros individually here, so let's delete all of those. And let's go to QwikTouchPro, run macro export. And we want to use our new clear transaction return to start that has those 3 escapes on it. So we got that and that. So cancel button's working now. And I'll tell you what, while we're here, if we right click on this and copy and come back into our review order screen. So this cancel button right now, select a single control, has the old macro. I can right click on that, choose paste macros to replace all those, say okay. And now we're going to replace that with our new, and that's just for consistency again. And that also means if I ever need to change the way I clear a transaction, I can just edit that one macro file. I don't have to track down all these locations. So where are we at? Back to the payment screen. So the cancel button's good. If they click that, we're going to clear the transaction, return to the main screen. If we hit the back button, we want to change this. Whoops, let's go into the macro editor. We do want to show a template, but we don't want to go back to the sales screen. We want to go back to the review order screen. Just go back one screen and hit update. Not going to customize that. But before we do, remember when we get to the sales payment screen, we're on this payment screen. So we need to escape again 3 times before we go back to our previous template. So 1, 2, 3, to get them back to where they can add more inventory items. So let's just close keystroke here. So when we click the back button here, before we show the review order screen, we're going to go back to active program, send code, escape. Just going to hit E to get to escape, add, and same thing we did last time. We'll go QwikTouchPro, repeat next action, and we're 3 times is the number of times we needed to hit. And again, you could hit more than that if you wanted to. 3 is fine here. So we're going to repeat the next action 3 times, which is to send escape. Whoops. And then we're going to go back to our previous template. So that's good. We're going to save that. And let's go back to, let's open up our splash screen here and start this whole process from the start. So I'm going to hit Control P to preview my template. It's going to automatically open keystroke. It's going to wait 2.5 seconds and clerk us in like we saw in our very first video. Now we're ready to touch here to begin. We can add some items to our inventory or to our invoice. We can check out. We can update the number of items we have. We can go to checkout again. We could go back now, which hits escape 3 times, puts us back to where we could update our inventory item, or hit back again to add even more items. Checkout, checkout again, and we could hit cancel to clear our transaction, start over, that worked. Touch here to begin again, let's just add a couple more, update the item, go back in, and we'll simulate our cash payment to get us back to a brand new transaction. And I think that's going to do it for this video series of creating a kiosk using QwikTouchPro and Keystroke. We started with a splash screen, and we've ended up now on our enter payment screen. And we'll probably do some future videos here where we add a few more nice to haves on this, polish it up a little bit. But that is the gist of it. So as always, thanks for watching. I do have a small addition to make to the end of this video. Let's go ahead and preview our template here. If you noticed in the previous videos, when we go to touch here to begin, when we start a transaction, we often see the remainder of the previous transaction down here in our amount due and our total line items. And what's actually happening there, let's close QwikTouchPro, minimize keystroke. If we go into keystroke and look in our tutor folder, and let's look at this TRN1 KFO file. This is the data port essentially that we're reading in. And if we look in this file, we can see right now that the last checkpoint is that the transaction was cleared, which is correct. That's the last thing that happened. But clearing the transaction doesn't necessarily reset this data port. Notice it still says there's 1 line item. We still show that there's $16.24 due on this. If we scroll down far enough, we'll see that there's a line item at least on here, line item. So what's happening here is keystroke doesn't necessarily reset this data port when a transaction is cleared or saved. And if we go back into keystroke, then let's go back into QwikTouchPro so we can actually see the data port. So we're going to it. So we're still seeing the remainders of the last data port. There's a couple things we can do to clear it. Like if you hit F8 to pull up a customer and then hit escape, that leaves the customer entry box, which does completely reset the data port in our case. But we don't necessarily want to hit F8 and escape every time we start a new transaction. So what I'm going to do to reset the data port, let's close that. Actually, let's leave that open. Clear a transaction, get it back into a bad state here. And let's minimize that and go back into our keystroke tutor folder. And you see I've created this TRN1 empty KFO file. And if we look in here, this is a copy of the TRN1 KFO data port file right after I hit F8 and then escape to clear the customer, to leave the customer entry box. So the last checkpoint's left customer entry box. But now we have num lines is 0, our amount due is 0, we don't have any line items on here. So this is essentially a fresh copy of the data port, if you will. And again, I made that by, in keystroke, I hit F8 and escape, and then I just came in and copied the TRN KFO file that it created, or updated. And now I've come down here to this batch file I've created, say edit. So I've created this batch file that just copies this empty TRN1 empty KFO file. Let's zoom in a little bit. Just copies this empty KFO data port file over the top of the existing one. And if we close that, and now if you notice down here in QwikTouchPro, we're still showing the old data port. If I double click my batch file to run it, we're going to see that it resets the data port. And then QwikTouchPro recognizes that and resets our labels as well. And even disables our checkout button because now we see that there really are no line items on this invoice. So let's close that. Let's close QwikTouchPro. Go back into the editor. So we want to run that batch file probably every time we get to this touch here to begin screen. Every time we load this, that means that the last person either finished their transaction or their transaction was cleared or that the kiosk maybe is just turned on or booted up. So we know anytime we come to this transaction or come to this screen, we should be on a brand new transaction and that it's safe to reset the data port. So let's go ahead and create a program. So under data, data sources, or I'm sorry, data programs, we're going to hit new program and we're just going to browse out to that batch file. And that was in C, keystroke, tutor. It's reset TRN1 bat. No switches, don't need any of that. That's all just keystroke related. We don't want to show the window. We don't want to see the little DOS prompt pop up every time this runs. So we're going to turn that off and we'll hit create. And let's call this reset data port and hit save. And now we just want to open that program every time this template loads. So we're going to go under template, macros, edit. And when this template loads, we're going to go to programs, open program. And we're going to browse out to reset data port and hit add. But we actually have a little timing issue here. Again, the use case here, the last person swiped their credit card, they finished their transaction, and we come immediately back to this screen here. But keystroke could still be finishing up with that data port, still updating it, making changes to it. And we want to make sure that we give keystroke time to completely be done with the data port before we overwrite it. Just so we don't, if we overwrite it and then they overwrite it, we're back to the old data again. So we want to just give it a minute or a second here. And to do that, we'll do QwikTouchPro send pause, and let's pause for 1 second. And that should be enough time to, let everything kind of settle down and get to a spot where the data port's ready to be reset. And this 1 second pause, remember every time we come to this template, we're starting a new sale, which means either the computer's just booted up or the previous customers walked off after completing their sale. So by the time we get to the screen, someone's probably, worst case scenario, walking up to this template when this template loads. So a second should be more than enough time. We should be able to sit on this template for a second without anybody coming up and trying to use the templates all. So let's hit close on that and save. And let's just see how we did here. Let's preview our template. We'll go to keystroke. Let's just touch here to begin. And we've got no items on there now. Let's just make sure. Let's add a couple items, clear our transaction. We'll be on the touch here to begin screen. We'll wait our second and go back in, and now our items have been reset. And that should work from anywhere. If we go all the way to our checkout screen and we choose cancel here to reset the transaction, we should, by the time we come up here and click touch here to begin, our line items should have reset. So that's just one thing. Again, if you noticed in the previous videos, these old items were remaining, these previous information about the last sale was remaining until we add an item to the invoice. So that just cleans all of that up. And that's going to be it for this little video. And again, thanks for watching.